Hello, guys. David Vose here again. Get ready for a spectacular video. We're going to add to what we did yesterday, and it 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 really is sad that only a few hundred people are even watching these videos because they're the best videos I've ever done. They have knowledge that I don't think anyone is aware of. I would really appreciate if you guys would get this knowledge and this information out to as many people as you can. But we're going to keep doing the videos. I guess if it gets down to the point where I'm the only one benefiting from these videos, I mean, I benefit from them because of the research and the prayer and kind of like a journal. You put all this information down so that you don't forget it and it starts fitting together like a glove, and you learn and you add line upon line, and it's wonderful to know these amazing truths. Yesterday, we were talking about the food of life, and we were talking about the palm tree, which we determined might be the tree of life. And we found out some interesting things about how literally the palm tree is so healthy and has these anti-aging properties, as well as that the cells of the palm tree literally keep on being alive for indefinite periods of time. They don't know if they ever die. So, guys, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Get you some coffee and please watch this video prayerfully and tell me what you think about this information. So we were talking about the palm tree. And I've done videos about this some years ago, but as I was doing the video yesterday, it was popping up into my mind of how Deborah, the mother of Israel, literally the teacher of the school of the prophets, even before Elijah, she was probably the teacher of individuals like Samson and Samuel. Samuel was a great prophet, highly regarded by King David. And it wasn't very long before Samuel and Samson, and then Gideon before them, just a few years before that, was the mother of Israel, Deborah. And if you'll remember, she taught her class, her students. Remember, that's where we get this idea of discipleship and disciples and master. Master means the teacher, and a disciple means a student. And so today, we think that Jesus was this thing called the Lord, right? Well, it's a translation of the word master. Deborah was also the Lord, the master. And she was a more ancient and wiser master than some of the greatest masters. And it was because of her teaching under the palm tree, by the way. Was it the tree of life? We will see. That brought this information down. And we're going to probably talk, I don't know if today or where we'll cover this information, but one of her students was Gideon. And, we've talked a little bit about that, but there's some really neat symbology there. We're going to talk about the 72 sons and how there was an Abimelech or Abimelech, a father Molech in the land of Canaan. I know. And how when Deborah was the prophet of Israel, the mother of Israel, the teacher of Israel, the teacher of the prophets, they had a war. And it says that the heavens fought, the stars of heavens fought. And what's all that about? Well, probably symbolic and prophetic. But really, what was all that about? So we'll get into all of this. But AI says Deborah, the only female judge in the book of Judges, was known for holding court under a palm tree between Ramah and Bethel in Ephraim. Now, just for a second, I'd like to point out that the closest town to me, which is about 20 miles, is Rama, New Mexico. So I'm living in Rama. Ha ha ha! And Bethel means Beth, house of El, the house of El. And it was in Ephraim. Why? Because Jerusalem was a couple of miles from Bethel, but it was over the border of Ephraim into Judah. Well, the border of Judah and Ephraim had a couple of towns. One was Bethel, one was Bethlehem. And Bethlehem was where all these individuals that came down from Deborah were always living in this area. It was like a temple complex. There were several places. And if you want to know where that actually is, it's down by Cairo, Egypt. And just down the ways a little bit from Cairo is Luxor and Dendera and Karnak, which is about a mile and a half from there. And both Karnak and, well, Karnak used to be called by the Egyptians Wasit. And the Greeks called it Thebes. So this was one of the most famous, one of the capitals there of the Lower Egypt. And so all of this was a temple complex. They worshipped Amun-Ra in both Karnak and Luxor. And Amun-Ra is the word that we use at the end of our prayer. Both the Judeans, the Christians, the Hindus, and the Muslims all say amen. Because everything we do, whether we bless or say a blessing or say a prayer, everything we do has always been in the name of Amun. And Amun-Ra means Amun, son of Ra. Now, it's interesting that Deborah is Deborah. And it's also interesting that along the Nile they got the palm trees, because they were the ones who revered this information. All of this information comes from the Egyptian priesthood. Remember, Heliopolis is where we're talking about, and Karnak and Luxor, this whole area. In our Bible, we call it Jerusalem and Bethel, Bethlehem, these kinds of cities, a little complex. And it was on the border of Judah and Ephraim. Okay, well, remember what we said in Isaiah chapter 19, verse 19, that there is a temple dedicated unto the Lord, which is Jesus, the I Am, at the border and in the midst of Egypt. Well, in Egypt, there's upper and lower. And the border between northern and southern Egypt, the border is in this complex of these temples. Some of the temples were in the southern part and some were in the northern part. So Jerusalem, and this is where Ur, Salem, Ra of peace, was. But the southern city would have been down in Judah, where Solomon built the temple at Karnak. And they worshiped Amun, son of Ra. And it was dedicated also to a woman. Well, that's pretty interesting because Bethlehem was about 10 miles south of Jerusalem, according to the scholars today. But they think it's in the area called Palestine. So they say, okay, but Bethel was in the northern kingdom of Ephraim, about 10, 12, 13 miles north of Jerusalem. So Bethel was like 20-some different miles, I don't know how far, from Bethlehem. But remember what we said in some videos back where we were talking about Bethlehem and the reason why all the king priests were born there. It's because this is where Elimelech and Naomi didn't have an heir, right? They're from Ephratah, from Bethlehem, living in the northern, just over the border into Ephraim. Ephratah may have something to do with Ephraim, but David was of Jesse from Ephratah. Okay, King David was from this area of Bethlehem and was born there, just as Jesus was born there. Why? Because the lineage of Joseph, of his son, firstborn son Ephraim, came down to Elimelech, or El's king. Molech means king. And remember how we said that Molech is something that the Canaanites used all the time. Abimelech, father Molech, Abimelech, which is this king priest of the Canaanites. Shechem, who married Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and had a daughter named Asenath, who married Joseph. And so this is all this great big complex down there. But today they think this is up there in Palestine. They're just making all this up. They just named all these cities after places they read somewhere in the Bible. But remember, Abraham was on the pyramid temple, the pinnacle of this, what they call this mountain, or the Great Pyramid, because there are no other mountains there. It was on the river Nile. There was a mountain. Well, the only mountain there is the great pillar of Enoch. And Abraham was taken to the pinnacle of the temple, just like Jesus was, just like Jacob, or we call him James, the just, who was thrown off the pinnacle of this temple, the Great Pyramid at Cairo. And he was told, look northward, eastward, southward, and westward, and all the land that you see, I will give it to thee, and everywhere thy foot shall tread. So it literally says all the way into the river, beyond the river Egypt, and beyond the river Euphrates, meaning all the way into India, all of Africa, all that he could see from the top of the mountain. Remember what the devil, which is the same analogy of Yahweh taking the children of Israel into the wilderness, testing them for 40 years, tempting them. Remember, Jesus was tempted in the wilderness for 40 days by the devil, who said, bow down and worship me. And he said, no, not for all the money in the world. But the devil was Yahweh, tempting him. Says, if you bow down to materialism, to violence, to vengeance, then I will give you all the kingdoms of the world. From the pinnacle of this temple, Cairo, he could see all the kingdoms of the world. Well, it's symbolic. You can't see the whole world from Cairo, but Cairo is the center of all the land masses, the continental land masses of all the world, the center of all the land mass in the world. With America on the west, China on the east, Europe on the north, Africa to the south. The center of all the land masses, the hub, which the Bible gives a name, it's a name of a cave. The cave that Abraham bought, Machpelah, which means a vortice, a cave that goes swirling like a wormhole or a vortice into the center of the earth. It's a vortice to the Gilgal, or the wheel, which is the Galilee of the nations, the circuit of the nations. And this is the place not far from Jericho where the Israelites, when they crossed the river, set up 12 stones and called it Gilgal. This is the place, the center. And those stones are not just some rocks they got out of the river. They set up some temples. You remember when they were going into the promised land, they come to Jericho first, and they saw this beautiful woman, the harlot, Rahab the harlot. Other places, it's Rahab the dragon, because this is the Canaanite high priestess, the woman, the Asenath, the daughter of Dinah. This is the lineage of Jacob through Dinah. through the Canaanite woman, Naamah, that married Noah, or Naomi, that was married to Elimelech. So this was the Canaanite woman. Remember, Judah, which was the father of the Jewish nation, was married to Tamar, the Canaanite woman, the harlot. So all Judeans in the world trace their lineage back to the Canaanite woman. And this is the seed of the woman that shall crush the serpent's heel. But this Rahab is a Canaanite woman that ended up marrying Joshua, the rabbis say in the Midrash. So Joshua was the only one who went into the land, which is the same name as Jesus. And it's a type of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, or Mary of the Tower, with her red, scarlet. No, remember she was supposed to be a prostitute? Well, that's not what Mary was. She was Mary of the Tower, and it wasn't a brothel. It was the great tower of the city of Heliopolis. But this cave, or vortis, or the center, the hub of Galilee, or Gilgal the wheel, was right there. That's actually beneath the pit that's beneath Cairo. And so Abraham was on top of this great pyramid because it was already there when Abraham got there, because that was the pillar of Enoch, and Enoch built that and inscribed in the walls of the great pyramid the pillar of Enoch, or the phoenix bird. And the Phoenicians, why did they call it Phoenicians? Because they were Canaanites, Phoenicians. And they were this woman, Asenath, the daughter of Shechem, the Canaanite, the son of Abimelech, father Molech. And so Molech goes back before the flood, and he's the king, because we have Lamech, who was the father of Noah, and another Lamech that was the father of Naomi. So now we have another Naomi married to Elimelech, who has no child, and it was Boaz of the house of Judah that steps in and does a Levirate marriage. So at this point, all the kings of Israel became children of Judah. Okay. However, remember, the promise was to be of the line of David. David shall never be in want of a child to sit upon the throne forever and ever. So, the son of David, David's son, will be king. Well, it's not just one son after another, after another, after another, just keep, putting new children every time they're born. But it's saying that one day a son of David would come who would be the Messiah, and that was Jesus. So Jesus says to the Pharisees, if David said, my Lord said to my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I put thine enemies as a stool for thy feet, sit thou at my right hand, who is it sitting at the right hand of the Lord? Well, it's Jesus who sits at the right hand of the Father. So he's sitting at the right hand of his Father. Who is Jesus' Father? Well, David shall never be in want of a son. It will be David's son who sits upon the throne. And Jesus is King David's son. And so this is why Jesus said, whose son is he? This Messiah who sits at the right hand of his Father. Whose son is he? Who's his father? And the Pharisees were like, who's the Messiah's father? It's David. Whose son is he? Oh, so the father is who? David. Da-vi, which is where we get the word divine. Daoud, or dad, because you don't pronounce the V in many languages. It's silent. So it's Daoud, dad, dada. And it is part of the word, if you go back far enough, they would say Ada. Now the im on the end is plural, Adim. But Adim is the father. Divine, Daoud, David, Diati, this is the father. And who is the Messiah? He's the son of David. And it's interesting because you can find where there are several prophecies where David shall have a son that will sit upon the throne. But you can also find several prophecies that say it will be David. In the end, King David will return, and he himself shall reign all forever. My servant David shall be their king, it says. So how is it that the prophecy could be fulfilled that David himself would be king and his son? Well, because it says there in the New Testament that Jesus will reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. That's exactly what it says there. The Lord said to my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until. And then it says that Jesus himself will hand everything back unto his deity and to his Father, his dia. So, ultimately, one day, the eternal kingdom will be ruled over by King David. Now, this is also true with the Greeks. You've got Perseus, or you've got the Phoenix, because remember, the Egyptians called the Polaris star Phoenix. The Chinese called it the Emperor's Seat, but today we call it Polaris. But it is the star that's reigning right now in the center where everything spins around and revolves around Polaris in the north. But before it was Polaris, it was Cephas. And Cephas is the father, the wife, his wife being Cassiopeia, and their daughter being Andromeda. And it's Perseus, which represents Jesus, that came into the world to save Andromeda from the great beast, the sea beast. And all of this is the story of Adam and Eve and the human race. And Jesus is the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Adam, the son of man. So, who is Deborah? Why is it that they don't know that the temple was at Luxor, Egypt, and Cairo, in this complex of temples? That there is the northern and the southern part of Egypt, and there is in the midst thereof a temple, Isaiah 19:19, dedicated unto the I Am, not to the I Am vengeance, but dedicated to the I Am, the light. It is Ra Salem. It is the temple of Ra. And it is the temple of Hathor, which is in the middle between Luxor and Cairo, which would have been Heliopolis, the city of Ra. And so they're in the midst of this temple complex, probably about a 30-mile circle of these complexes, sits the temple at Dendera, which is dedicated to Hathor, which in other languages, she has different names, Ishtar, or, as we've talked about a lot, Artemis. Artemis is a temple dedicated to the same Hathor, but that's where the tower was, right? At Heliopolis, the Cleopatra Tower as well, because she was the reincarnation of Isis and Aphrodite. So therefore, Cleopatra was one of the incarnations of this Virgin Mother who was there at Hathor. Now, remember, Bethlehem is the city of Miriam. That's the sister of Moses. She also had a priesthood, but Moses and Aaron didn't want her to be a priest as high as them. And so Miriam prayed to the Lord, and the Lord had Moses humbly come in and anoint Miriam as the high priest. And then that is where the Melchizedek, the Rex Sacrorum priesthood was, there at Hathor, dedicated to Miriam, Mary. Miriam is just another way of saying Mary. That's the temple of Mary, the Virgin Mother, Hathor, the Mother Nature. And that is Hathor and at Dendera, and that is the original Bethlehem, where it is between Cairo and Luxor, or the Temple of Karnak. And so when Solomon built the temple, he didn't build Cairo. That was built by Enoch. But the temple at Luxor while it has so many of the features of the Temple of Solomon, especially the two pillars, Jachin and Boaz. And when you look at the pictures of Solomon's temple, you can see it looks very much like the temple at Luxor. When you go to the archaeologist who says, oh, yeah, Solomon's temple was up there in Palestine, but no one's ever found it. No one's ever dug it up. They dig down where, obviously somebody by now would have probably dug down and found something, but they've never found any hide nor hair of the great Solomon's temple. And you think about the fact that Solomon was so great that all the people of the world, the Queen of Sheba, came to see his glory, right? And he had the Syrians helping him, and there was golden statues, and he was bringing in all this money and wealth. And the bloodline of King David through Solomon was, as we said, the son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. One of their, the heir there was Nebuchadnezzar, that ruled over Babylon. So all the world seems to biblically have recognized Solomon as this great king that all the royal bloodlines came from. Even when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, they took some of the royal seed to Babylon. Why? Because they knew it was the royal seed. Nebuchadnezzar was the son of Solomon too. So if this was such a massive, great temple where, some of these places supposedly where Abraham was buried, Jacob, Sarah, Isaac, and yet we can't find their headstone. We can't find their tomb. We don't know where they even lived or walked. We have records that they went from Bethel, they went to Jerusalem and did this, they did that. Yeah, but where was Jerusalem? Where was Bethel? I'm telling you, this complex temple that all the world revered was the temple complex from Cairo to Thebes or Luxor and Karnak, and the temple at Dendera. Just the same group of towns that we're always talking about: Bethlehem, Bethel, Jerusalem, and these cities. This is the temple complex. There was a city in the books of Joshua and Judges where Deborah was, where the priests at Bethel lived, called the city of Nob. Well, in the Egyptian area, there is a city where the priests lived. This is probably a little town right next to the temple of Hathor, which would be Mary. In Dendera, it was called Quina. And they officiated in those temples, just like it says there in our Bibles in the days of Deborah and King David. So if they can't find this massive headstone or a temple or a marker or a rock or a stone or anything to verify Abraham was there, or even King Solomon or King David, then how do we know it was there? Because if you go down to Egypt, you see all these temples. And, the Great Pyramid has got the empty tomb, Osiris, Osiris, Lazarus. And it was the city of On or John. So we've gone through all of this. We can prove that Josephus says there was a temple that they rebuilt Jerusalem, and it had a tower, and it was at Heliopolis. That's obviously the tower, Magdala, that Mary officiated at. The virgins that were in the temple could not have been at Herod's temple. So you go to Palestine today and you see Herod's temple, the Wailing Wall and all this. Well, there it is, Dave. No, that was Herod's temple. After the captivity, when they went to Babylon and they came out of captivity, they were going to go back and rebuild the temple. Well, they went back to Heliopolis and rebuilt the temple of Jerusalem. That's where Josephus says the temple was built, and the Zadokite priesthood was. There's no argument in history, in all the historical books, Josephus and all the other Any historian, they will all tell you, Plutarch, Pliny, Philo, all of them will tell you that the Temple of Jerusalem was rebuilt at Heliopolis near Cairo, Egypt. There's just no question. When they came back, they built the temple at Heliopolis. They rebuilt it. Now, another faction, another group of individuals built another temple, but that was Herod's temple. Herod wasn't an Israelite. He was of the lineage of Esau. It was not of the Zadokite priesthood. Remember, the Essenes would not go to that temple at Herod in Palestine because it was Herod's temple. It was defiled. It didn't have the right priesthood. All the way back to the prophet Ezekiel, the Lord said, I will only use the priests of Zadok. And this is why James the Just, or James the Zadokite, Jacob the Zadokite, that slammed his gavel down in Acts chapter 15, why was he reigning over Peter or making the decisions for Peter, James, and John? Because Jacob James was the righteous Zadokite priest. And the only place the Zadokite priests ruled or made their decisions or had their Sanhedrin was at Heliopolis. There is absolutely no question about this, friends. And, you know, these historians, they don't know this history like I do. They're only repeating like a parrot, blah, 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 whatever they are trained to say, but they don't know this information. It's right there. They could read Josephus and see that they rebuilt the temple at Leontopolis, right there at Heliopolis. And it was called the New Jerusalem. And they had the Zadokite priest. And John, literally in the history books, is the high priest. There was a John 1, John 2, a John 3, and a John 4, and I think a John 5. And the dates don't exactly match because there's a lot of these dates that they're wrong about. So the rebuilding of Jerusalem at Herod's temple doesn't match because they're looking at the wrong temple. Now, how then, though, do you square the fact that if the temple at Luxor with those two pillars is the Pillar of Solomon, obviously the Great Pyramid is a temple of the Lord, as it says in Isaiah 19:19. There's no other question. Nowhere, if you want proof, that's it. In Isaiah 19:19, the Bible says that the temple unto the Lord is the Great Pyramid. What Lord? Well, it's the temple of Enoch. And of course, King David and all the other lineal descendants of this royal bloodline from Enoch down through Noah and down to today would have to be there at that great temple that's spoken of in Isaiah 19:19, a temple unto the Lord, in the midst and at the border thereof, which is right there at Cairo, between Cairo and Dendera and Karnak and at Luxor. And this is Bethel, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and the city complex and temple complex, the city of Nob, that's there in our Bibles. So how do you square that with the fact that they say that the temple of Luxor was built by Ramses II in 1300 BC? I mean, they said they started building it in 1400 BC and didn't finish it until around 1200 and something, about 1200. Well, Solomon was born around 1000 BC, about 990 or something. Just right at about the year 1000, Solomon was born. So King David was some years before 1000, but in the 10th century, King David lived, and then Solomon was born around 1000 BC. So how could Solomon have built the temple at Luxor if they're claiming Ramses II built it? Remember, Ramses not a name. Ra Moses. The title that was given to Moses, that's just his title. And Ra Moses is the Moses in the lineage of Ra, because it's the city of Ra, Ra-U-Salam, Ur-Salam, or Ra-Salam. The city of peace, the city of the light, the city of the sun. The phoenix bird. And So what would we do with this discrepancy? Well, here's the thing. As it says here, if you look on the screen, there are alternative theories to the mainstream chronology of ancient Egypt that suggest Ramesses II lived around 1000 BC. What? Huh? Maybe they don't know what they're talking about when they're dating all of these things? Maybe they don't. In fact, I will posit to you that they have no clue what they're talking about, because what they did, they're called apologists. And what they did for years is they tried to make the story out to be whatever they want it to be. This is what the problem is. So there is others that have come recently and said, wait a minute, we're wrong about all this. Ramses II didn't live. I mean, this is why you can't figure out why in the history, when you read Manetho and the history of Egypt, that the time that looks like a time when Moses would have lived is not 1300 BC, but it could be far before that. And nobody could sync these dates up. Nobody could figure out any of these dates. Now, at some point, I don't know, a few years ago, many years ago, they came up with what they called this date that they will use, because they've proven this. They've proven when Jerusalem was destroyed by Babylon, or the fall of Babylon, 539 BC. And everything else they used to date from there. Just going by how many years a king lived and whatever, and just like a puzzle, just trying to put it all together. And they got the king list of the Egyptians and all of this, and they try to sync it all, but they can't do it very well. And they made a lot of mistakes. So there is alternative theories that Ramses II lived around 1000 BC rather than the widely accepted 13th century BC. If you think that they know anything about what they're talking about when they give you these dates, take a look at this. Now, we just said that they think, a lot of people had thought, that Ramses II was in the 13th century. As I said, I had to move because I had to plug my phone in. But as I said, if the temple at Luxor was made in the 13th century, then it couldn't have been Solomon's temple. But there are this new chronology where they say, oh, no, it was actually 1000, right around the time of Solomon when it was built. Well, that means you got to bring it back a couple of hundred years. And so, is there any indication that maybe we should do that? Well, look at this. The 15th century BCE is a date for the early Exodus. And then there's a different date, or in the 13th century, when it's the latter date. So they got two dates. Now, if you push it back 200 years, you've got to push everything back. And everybody's been going by the 13th century, that Moses was 1300, and it was in the time of this Ramses II. Well, that's preposterous. Look at this. It says the 15th century. The theory places the Exodus during the reign of Amenhotep II, 1453 to 1416. Now, I want you to know that Hotep is sometimes spelled Joseph. Yes, or Joseph. It's Amun Joseph. Remember we had Amun Ra? Which is Solomon. Sol, in the Latin for Ra, and Amun backwards, because the Hebrews have left to right, and it's different. So Amenhotep, could that be Joseph? Well, when did Joseph reign? Right after Joseph reigned, they forgot Joseph, remember? And then Moses came along some period of time later. So if they're 200 years off, because the 13th century would be 1200 and something, 1250 or whatever. And then the other date is like 1450. So they're 200 years off. These alternative chronologies, such as the New Chronology, maybe the more accurate chronology would be a better word, proposed by David Rohl, attempt to revise the dates of various periods in Egyptian history, including the New Kingdom when Ramses II reigned. One argument presented in favor of this alternative dating involves the analysis of non-royal genealogies. According to Rohl, if one attributes a generation length of 20 to 23 years, these genealogies would place Ramses II in the 10th century BC. And in the conventional chronology, they would be missing 7 generations. Okay, so we're not going to belabor all of this and try to prove the dates. But what I'm asking you to think about is this. Supposedly, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were the great patriarchs of the world. But they have no tomb. We don't know where they lived. We just know that Abraham went to the Nile and got up on a mountain and said, look, northward, westward, eastward, south, and all the land, I'll give it to thee, all the way beyond the Euphrates and the Nile. And yet, oh, yeah, it was probably up there in Palestine where he was, right? Well, how do you get the word Nile? You know, the Nile from, and a lot of people get confused because it talks about the Jordan River a lot of times. But that's a modern, Jordan River just means a descending water, the river of life, the descent of the water. In different tongues, they call these rivers different things. It could very well be the Nile River. But there's just too much we can't get into today. But I'm telling you that the cave where Abraham is buried and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah at Kirioth Arba, which is Kirioth, the city of Arba, is Hebron. Mount Moriah was right there. Kirioth Arba means the city of the four. Now, today we have 3 great pyramids there, which were tombs for 3 great people. We're missing one because when they rebuilt Cairo, they removed one of the great pyramids to build Cairo. There was originally 4, and this is the city of the 4. There were 4 giants that were buried there, and one of them is Osiris. And Osiris was raised from the dead, and Jesus raised Lazarus, or the Osiris, from the dead. It's the same story. It's telling you that Heliopolis and Karnak and Thebes in this area was the temple complex where Abraham went, where Jacob and Sarah and everybody died and was buried under the Great Pyramid. And this is also called the place called Golgotha, or the place of the skull. It's where John the Baptist's skull, where they cut his head off, was put, because John the Baptist is a great man that was also buried in the same area. Now, it goes back, though, to Adam's place of burial. And so we won't get too much into that, but it's very symbolic that the place of the skull was the capital. That's why you have decapitation of the head. Capital means the head, the skull. And this is why even in Rome, the headquarters was at the Capitol. Today we have the Capitol, which is the Washington. But it all goes back to the central location of the world, which is Heliopolis. Nobody could deny that Heliopolis was the great city of Ra, that is the great priesthood of Enoch, the royal bloodline. There's no question that the Bible we have today is hiding through mistranslations, and a lot of the scholars have lost this information. But the Temple of Solomon is there at Luxor. You can go and look at it and see the 2 pillars of Boaz and Jacob. Look at, and I'll show you a picture of it right here. Okay, that's the Temple of Luxor. It's basically an artist rendering. If you have any knowledge of what the Temple of Solomon looked like, it looked just like that. And notice at the entrance there are 2 pillars. And those 2 pillars were what we have in our Bible as the pillars of Jacob and Boaz. Now, I'll show you the Temple of Solomon, a picture, an artist's rendition of the Temple of Solomon. Well, here's another picture of the temple at Luxor. There's the two pillars of Jachin and Boaz. And there's some more pictures. Now, let me show you the Temple of Solomon. All right, there you go. Now, remember, we don't know what the Temple of Solomon looked like. We've never found it. So there are no pictures of it, not even the ruins. However, this is how they reconstruct it from what we have in the Bible. And I'll be darned, there's the two pillars, and it looks very much exactly like the temple at Luxor. Look at that. You see, there on the right, in front of the temple, there's it's an area where there's all these pillars. On the last thing they did on Luxor's temple, after everything else was all built, but one of the last things that they added on to it was this area with all these pillars, 134 pillars, and 12 main pillars. And you can literally see that they're putting it in the pictures there on Solomon's temple. Now, look at that one on the right. It's a rectangular building, square, and in the front, there is the two pillars, Jacob and Boaz. It's exactly what we saw with the Temple of Solomon. And by the way, did you know, I'll show you here from AI, the Temple of Amun-Ra, known as the Great Temple of Amun, or Amun, was primarily located within the Karnak Temple complex in Thebes, modern-day Luxor. Okay. Pay attention, guys. Amun-Ra. Ra is the sun. Ammon is Ammon. We've got Solomon. Solomon. Ra means the sun to the Egyptians. Sol means the sun to the Latin-speaking individuals of Rome. So the name Solomon is the Latin version of Amun-Ra. Amun-Ra. Remember, some languages is from forward to backwards, some is from backwards to forwards. So when you bring Amun-Ra down to Rome, the Latinized spelling is Solomon. No longer Amun-Ra, but Sol-Aman. And the temple of Amun-Ra, you see, isn't just the Karnak temple. It's also the whole temple complex there at Thebes. The entire temple complex there was dedicated to Solomon or Amun-Ra. I guarantee it. And when you have a temple that is the exact same name as Solomon, Amun-Ra, that has the two pillars of Boaz and Jachin, that has the exact same rectangular square shape, that was the central location of all the religions of the world, because remember, Solomon, when he built the temple, he unified the northern and the southern kingdoms, which is the southern kingdoms of Judah and the northern kingdom of Ephraim, so that Bethel and Jerusalem and Bethlehem and all of this area became one complex, and the southern and the northern kingdoms became one. After Solomon died, they went into apostasy, and the two kingdoms split, and there was northern Israel, the 10 tribes that were separate from the 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin. But Solomon unified the kingdom when he built this great pyramid and when he built this great temple. And by the way, the temple has the same dimensions. Both Solomon's temple and the temple at Luxor, they have the dimensions of a man. The head, the body, and the legs. in a rectangular box. A boat, the body, the abode, which is what these words originally went back to in the pictographic language. And so this was the body of man, right? The temple is the body. And the great temple, the Temple of Solomon, is a body, the body of man. And it is the exact dimensions that represents all the dimensions and measurements of a man. And all the Egyptian rites. You know, Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes, Psalms, all these, the Book of Wisdom, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, this wisdom literature. You can literally find the writings of Solomon at Luxor in the Book of the Dead, which is written by Amun-Ra and the priesthood of Amun-Ra or Solomon. And all of the writings that we have in our Bible today were written there at Luxor. This has absolutely been proven. Not only that, guys, get a load of this. The true Christian scriptures were all found there. The early Christians were Coptic Christians, Gnostic Coptic Christians. And the Nag Hammadi library is found there, down by Thebes and Luxor. And that's where the early Christians were. And there's lots of books and, like certain works that are still in extant where people talk about early Christians and mention their way of life and stuff down there, that they thrived there. So there's no question that this area down there was not only where true Judaism began, or Israel began, but also it is the place where Christ was born, and Miriam and Mary served in the temple, and Deborah, the mother of Israel, sat and taught the school of the prophets under the palm tree, which is the tree of life, and represented in the story, the esoteric meaning is she was teaching and giving the water of life, dipping out from the river of life, where it came to a palm tree, which is the refreshing bread of life, the food of life, the tree of life that gives eternal life. When you partake of it, it is the true knowledge of the true priesthood from the lineal descent of Deborah, the mother of all of Israel. So there were scriptures coming out of that Jerusalem down at Heliopolis after the destruction of Jerusalem. We have them in our Apocrypha that talk about that temple and that the wisdom literature and Solomon and all of this being down there. We actually have all this documented in the scriptures, but no one ever reads the Apocrypha. So King David started building the temple years before Solomon. It wasn't finished until Solomon, but it was in the year 1000 AD. And remember also that when Joseph, the father of Ephraim, married Asenath, the daughter of Shechem, the Canaanite king, and he married Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. But when Asenath, the Canaanite, married Joseph, they went to Jerusalem to live. And Asenath was a princess at Heliopolis, which is Jerusalem. Because when the children of Israel went down into Egypt, they were living in a place called Goshen for 500 years. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all these people were in Egypt. When they left with Moses, they left northern Egypt, the Goshen area, which, by the way, the river Nile is the spine and the spinal fluid, the CSF, which goes up the spine and lights the 7 candlesticks. And there are 7 cities along the Nile that represent those 7 chakras. And if you go up to the top, where it goes into the Mediterranean. There's like a complex of rivers going out in the shape of a kind of a moon, which is the skull. And that's the place of the skull. And the place there at Cairo is literally the pineal gland in that skull, which is there at Goshen, where the Israelites lived for 500 years. So when they left there, it was because the southern part of Egypt began to forget who they were, and they had a fight, and they tried to, make them slaves. Basically, the lower nature trying to make the higher nature a slave. The lower kingdom making the higher kingdom a slave. So when they finally left, what they were really doing is crossing the river of reeds, or the Sea of Reeds, and going down into Lower Egypt and wandering around in the circuit, which is Galilee, right? This is the Gilgal, or the circuit, for 40 years. And this is how they wandered around and around through Africa, Arabia, Europe. They went everywhere and established wherever their foot tread was their land, the whole world. And that was the center, the hub right there. Now, with that in mind, I want you to understand something. Remember, we spoke of the temple of Hathor. It was a temple dedicated to the Virgin Mother. That is Miriam, Mary, the sister of Moses, who was named that because she is the great womb, the Virgin Mother, that gave birth to all these lineal descendants that became the judges of Israel, and finally the king, David. So the Messiah would come through her womb, Miriam, Mary, the Virgin Mother, who is at Bethlehem, which is in Egypt called Dendera, the temple of Hathor in Dendera. That is Bethlehem, and that is where Jesus was born. Jesus was born in Dendera. And Mary, the Virgin Mother, was a high priest at the temple of Hathor. I guarantee it, friends. But now, let's come down from Moses' time and Miriam, and you can look this up, but Miriam's city was Bethlehem. That's where she had a temple and was dedicated to her. She was the higher priesthood, higher than the temple at Jerusalem, which eventually just began to follow after Judaism and the lower commandments. But the temple at Dendera was the reverence of the woman, the Isis, the Ishtar, the Artemis, called Hathor there in Egypt, the Virgin Mother. And we come down to a time, let me show you here. Deborah, the prophetess, the judge of Israel, is believed to have lived during the period of the Judges, which is generally placed between the death of Joshua and the establishment of the monarchy, roughly from 1200 BCE to 1000 BC. Traditional Jewish chronology says she judged Israel for 40 years, from 1107 BC until her death in 1067. So she was alive right around the time that King David comes up, and Samuel, who was David's, like Merlin, his prophet, was literally Deborah's student, taught under the palm tree, the tree of life. And it was just before King David. So she's like the mother of Israel, or literally the mother of King David, this Deborah. But as we said, what does Deborah mean? Well, this one's going to blow your mind, guys. Sit back and try to hang on, because this might just blow your mind. Remember what we were saying, that Artemis was the queen bee, and the priesthood there had the Essenes, which were drone bees, and the Melissae, the women priests, and that Artemis, or the queen bee, ruled over that temple. Now, that's up in Ephesus. Remember, it was patterned after Heliopolis and Thebes and this temple at Luxor and Hathor. So, remember, I'm telling you that Deborah was officiating a high priestess, the queen, the ruler of Israel, just before King David. And she was the teacher of Samuel and therefore the teacher of David. And her name means, look at this, originates from the Hebrew word Deborah, which means bee. In the Old Testament, Deborah was a prophetess and a judge who led the Israelites to victory, making the name associated with wisdom, courage, and leadership. The name Deborah is derived from the Hebrew word Deborah, which directly translates to a bee. In the book of Judges, Deborah is a prominent figure, serving as a prophetess and the only female judge of Israel. Beyond the literal meaning, the name Deborah is associated with the characteristics of bees: industriousness, organization, and the sweetness of honey. Friends, Deborah was the mother of Israel, the queen bee, the same priesthood that was spread all over the world. The real and true Jerusalem is the city of Ra, and the complex of cities and temples there were what we call Bethlehem, Bethel. Jerusalem was literally Karnak, Thebes, Luxor, and Cairo, with the temple complex there. And the higher priesthood was reigned over by a woman. They revered a woman. Our Bible tells you the story, but you barely even notice it, that Miriam was anointed as high priest by Aaron and Moses, who murmured against her because they didn't want to make her priest. But Moses then didn't get to go into the promised land because he got angry and he struck the rock in his arrogance and pride and didn't give glory unto the I am. And Aaron and Moses were murmuring, and the Lord said, no, you don't. And they went and they anointed her as high priest. If you look at how they went in and put the oil on her head, it's the exact same way that you anoint the high priest, which is the Melchizedek priest. And it was through that Bethlehem that all the kings and the messiahs and the anointed ones came, including Samuel and King David and all the rest, and Gideon. And she was the teacher of them all. There you go. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. But anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end it there. It looks like it's about to rain and it might start pouring and there's going to be some thunder. The wind's picking up, but it's wonderful. Anyway, I'm going to get this loaded, guys. I really hope that somebody out there will not only appreciate this and listen to it, but if you think that there's anything to this, if you feel as this is important, please help me get it out to as many people as we can, especially people that might be able to do something to maybe help get this out even further. There's got to be somebody out there that's got some clout that could get me on a radio program or something, right? I could do an hour a day, but this information should get out. And it's a shame that only a few hundred people are going to watch this. Like I said the other day, if somebody would just, after you watch it, just let me know that you watched it and what you think of it. Almost nobody said anything. Don't be shy, please. Let me know what you think about what we're saying here today. I think this is the most amazing information that's been presented about such important things. Eternal life. And understanding our scriptures and true spirituality. It's all about the truth that sets us free. Please help me, friends. I'm going to go ahead and go. The Lord loves you, and you know He loves you so, so much. All of His heart. He loves all of His children. We'll see you guys tomorrow. His grace and His peace will be with you all. Have a good one.